This isn't your typical gang story. Most criminal organizations start in the streets. They begin with drugs, territory, money. But Boixos Nois? They started in a football stadium. And that should have been our first warning sign. Barcelona, 1981. FC Barcelona's most passionate fans are about to create something that will terrorize Spain for decades. They called themselves Boixos Nois, Crazy Boys, in Catalan. But here's what nobody tells you about this story. They weren't just football fans who got out of hand. They were something far more sinister. Something that would infiltrate every level of Barcelona society. Something that would commit crimes so brutal, so organized, that even the Spanish police would struggle to stop them. And the most terrifying part? It all started with a song. By the end of this story, you'll understand why mentioning their name in certain parts of Barcelona can still get you killed. This is the true crime story of Boixos Nois. And trust me, nothing about this gang is what it seems. Here's what makes Boixos Nois different from every other criminal organization you've heard of. They didn't start selling drugs. They didn't begin with robbery. They didn't even start with violence. They started with loyalty. Camp Nou Stadium. A group of working-class teenagers from the Gracia neighborhood decide they're going to support FC Barcelona differently than anyone before them. They're not just going to cheer. They're going to create a spectacle. They're going to become the heartbeat of the stadium. But here's the first red flag that everyone missed. These weren't just passionate fans. They were studying other ultra groups across Europe, learning their tactics, their organization, their methods of control. Lazio's Irreducibili in Rome, Millwall's Bushwhackers in London, Ajax's F-Side in Amsterdam. But Boixos Nois were taking notes on something else. Something darker. They weren't just studying how to support a football team. They were studying how to build an army. And by 1982, they had their first 200 members. All sworn to absolute loyalty. All willing to do anything for the group. All unknowingly becoming part of something that would grow far beyond football. Because what started as teenage passion for Barcelona was about to become Barcelona's worst nightmare. By 1983, something was changing in the Boixos Nois. And the first people to notice weren't the police. They were other Barcelona fans. They started showing up to matches differently, recalls former season ticket holder Miguel Santos. Before, everyone just came to watch football. But these guys? They came like they were going to war. The Boixos Nois had developed a routine. They would meet 3 hours before every match. Not at bars like other fans. Not at restaurants. They met in an abandoned warehouse in the Gracia district. And here's what nobody talks about. They weren't just planning their chance. Police surveillance from 1984 shows they were conducting what can only be described as military-style briefings. Who were they fighting? Why did they need battle plans? What were they preparing for? Other ultra groups started avoiding Camp Nou when Barcelona played at home. Not because they were afraid of losing. Because they were afraid of what the Boixos Nois might do to them. And then came their first recruitment drive. Summer 1984. They didn't put up posters. They didn't advertise in newspapers. They went door to door in working-class neighborhoods, looking for angry young men, looking for people with nothing to lose, looking for people who wanted to belong to something bigger. By September 1984, they had 500 members. But here's what terrifies experts who study this case. They weren't recruiting football fans. They were recruiting soldiers. October 15, 1984. Barcelona versus Real Madrid. El Clásico. The biggest match in Spanish football. But what happened that day changed everything. The Boixos Nois didn't just show up to support Barcelona. They showed up to control every aspect of the experience. They had assigned seating charts for their members. They had designated roles for each person. They had backup plans for multiple scenarios. This wasn't football fandom. This was military organization. And then, in the 73rd minute, Real Madrid scored. What happened next shocked even seasoned Spanish police officers. The Boixos Nois didn't just boo. They didn't just express disappointment. They launched what witnesses described as a coordinated assault on Real Madrid supporters. But here's the detail that still haunts investigators. It was too organized, too precise, too planned. Normal fan violence is chaotic, explains Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, expert in crowd psychology. People get angry, they react emotionally, it's unpredictable. But what the Boixos Nois did that day, it was like watching a military unit execute a battle plan. 47 people were hospitalized. 3 people nearly died. And every single act of violence was committed by members of Boixos Nois. But when police tried to arrest the perpetrators, they had vanished. All 500 of them. Gone without a trace. Like they had never been there at all. November 1984. Inspector Carlos Mendoza gets the case that will define his career and destroy his faith in the Spanish justice system. I thought I was investigating football hooligans, Mendoza recalls in a rare 2019 interview. I had no idea I was about to uncover something that would reach the highest levels of Barcelona society. Mendoza's first discovery was shocking enough. The Boixos Nois weren't just organized. They were funded. Bank records showed regular deposits into accounts linked to the group. Large deposits. From sources that made no sense. Construction companies that had never built anything. Import, export businesses with no inventory. Consulting firms with no clients. Between 1982 and 1984, these phantom companies had funneled over 2 million pesetas to Boixos Nois accounts. In today's money, that's nearly $500,000. For a fan group that claimed to be made up of unemployed teenagers. But when Mendoza tried to trace the money back to its source, he hit walls. Legal walls. Bureaucratic walls. Political walls. Every lead I followed ended with a phone call from my supervisor telling me to drop it, Mendoza explains. Every document I requested mysteriously disappeared. Every witness I tried to interview suddenly became unavailable. Someone with serious power was protecting the Boixos Nois. Someone who didn't want their activities investigated. Someone who had the influence to shut down a police investigation. And that's when Mendoza realized. This wasn't a case about football violence. This was a case about corruption. January 1985. Inspector Mendoza makes a discovery that changes everything. Hidden in a filing cabinet at Barcelona City Hall, he finds a list. Names, addresses, and phone numbers. And next to each name, a profession. Construction foreman. Building inspector. City council member. Police sergeant. Judge's clerk. Port authority supervisor. Every single person on this list was a member of Boixos Nois. That's when I understood, Mendoza explains. They weren't just recruiting angry teenagers from poor neighborhoods. They were systematically infiltrating every level of Barcelona's infrastructure. The construction foreman controlled building permits. The building inspector controlled safety approvals. The city council member controlled zoning decisions. The police sergeant controlled street-level law enforcement. The judge's clerk controlled court scheduling. The port authority supervisor controlled import, export documentation. Between them, these Boixos Nois members could facilitate almost any criminal activity in Barcelona. But when Mendoza tried to arrest them, he got a call from the chief of police. Inspector, you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making. Sir, I have evidence that evidence can be misinterpreted. People's reputations can be destroyed by careless investigations. Mendoza was being warned off. But he didn't understand by whom, or why, until he found the second list. This one contained names he recognized. Names that made his blood run cold. Because it wasn't just low-level city employees who were members of Boixos Nois. It was people who could destroy careers. People who could make evidence disappear. People who could make investigators disappear. And at the top of the list, was a name that would explain everything. The name at the top of the list belonged to someone Inspector Mendoza never expected. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Joaquin Puig. If you don't recognize that name, you should. Because in 1985, Joaquin Puig was one of the most powerful men in Barcelona. He owned the largest construction company in Catalonia. He sat on the board of 3 major banks. He had connections to the Spanish government in Madrid. He was a regular at the most exclusive restaurants and clubs. And he was also the secret founder and financier of Boixos Nois. When I saw his name on that list, I thought there had to be a mistake, Mendoza recalls. Why would one of Barcelona's wealthiest businessmen be involved with football hooligans? But when Mendoza dug deeper, the truth was even more disturbing. Puig hadn't just joined Boixos Nois. He had created them. Bank records showed that every major decision made by the group was financed through shell companies owned by Puig. Phone records showed that the group's leaders called Puig before and after every major incident. Meeting schedules showed that Puig attended private Boixos Nois gatherings at his estate outside Barcelona. But here's what made Mendoza's blood run cold. Puig had been planning this since 1979, 2 full years before Boixos Nois officially formed. Documents found in Puig's office showed detailed psychological profiles of potential recruits, studies of European ultragroups and their organizational structures, analysis of Barcelona's political and economic vulnerabilities. This wasn't a businessman who had gotten involved with a fan group. This was a criminal mastermind who had created a private army. But why? What was Joaquin Puig planning that required 500 loyal followers willing to commit violence? Mendoza was about to find out. And he was about to wish he hadn't. February 1985. Inspector Mendoza breaks into Joaquin Puig's private office at 3 a.m. What he finds will haunt him for the rest of his life. Hidden behind a false wall, Mendoza discovers Puig's real files. Not construction contracts. Not banking documents. Not business correspondence. Maps of Barcelona with specific buildings marked. Lists of government officials with their schedules and security details. Detailed plans for something called Operation Catalonia. When I read those documents, Mendoza explains, I realized that everything we thought we knew about Boixos Nois was wrong. The football violence, the fan culture, even the name itself, it was all a cover. Operation Catalonia wasn't about supporting FC Barcelona. It was about taking control of Barcelona itself. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its detail. Phase 1. Infiltrate city services through Boixos Nois members. Phase 2. Create chaos through coordinated fan violence to justify increased security. Phase 3. Position Puig's people as the solution to the crisis. Phase 4. Gradually take control of Barcelona's government, police, and economy. By Puig's estimates, within 5 years, he would effectively control one of Spain's most important cities. But there was something else in those files. Something that made Mendoza realize this conspiracy went far beyond Barcelona. Letters from Madrid. Communications with officials in the Spanish government. References to similar operations in Valencia, Seville, and Bilbao. Joaquin Puig wasn't just trying to take over Barcelona. He was part of a nationwide network attempting to control Spain's major cities through organized criminal groups disguised as football fans. And they had been wildly successful. Mendoza photocopied everything he could carry and fled the building. He had uncovered the biggest conspiracy in modern Spanish history. But he was about to discover that knowing the truth and surviving long enough to expose it were 2 very different things. February 14, 1985. Valentine's Day. Inspector Mendoza never made it to dinner with his wife. 3 blocks from Barcelona police headquarters, 2 black sedans blocked his path. 6 men in ski masks surrounded his vehicle. But they didn't want to rob him. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted the documents. Inspector Mendoza, one of them said through his car window. You have something that belongs to Señor Puig. I don't know what you're talking about. The files you took from his office. The photographs you made. All of it. Hand it over, And your wife gets to see you come home tonight. They knew about the break-in. They knew about the evidence. They knew where he lived. Mendoza had no choice. He handed over the documents. But as the men disappeared into the Barcelona night, Mendoza smiled, because they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed he had only made one copy. That night, Mendoza sent a package to his brother in Madrid. Inside were photocopies of every document he had found in Puig's office, along with a letter explaining everything he had discovered about Boixos Nois, Joaquin Puig, and Operation Catalonia. But the next morning, when Mendoza arrived at work, his supervisor was waiting. "Carlos, you're being transferred. Effective immediately." "Sir, I'm in the middle of..." "You're being transferred to Santander. Traffic Division. Pack your desk." Santander was a small city on Spain's northern coast, 600 kilometers from Barcelona. About as far as they could send him without technically firing him. But as Mendoza cleaned out his desk, he noticed something else. Every file related to Boixos Nois had vanished. Every witness statement. Every evidence photograph. Every investigation note. Like the case had never existed at all. Except for one problem with their plan. Mendoza's brother in Madrid wasn't just anyone. He was a journalist for El País, Spain's largest newspaper, and he had just received the story of his career. March 3, 1985. Sunday morning. Spain wakes up to the biggest scandal in its modern history. The headline in El País reads, "Boixos Nois, the secret army of Barcelona's elite." Within hours, the story spreads across Europe. BBC, Spanish police uncover massive conspiracy, Le Monde, Barcelona crime network exposed, Corriere della Sera, football fans or private army. By Monday morning, Joaquin Puig's photograph is on the front page of every major newspaper in Spain. But here's what nobody expected. Puig doesn't deny the allegations. Instead, he calls his own press conference. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Puig begins, standing behind a podium at Barcelona's most expensive hotel. "The reports you have read are largely accurate. I did create and finance Boixos Nois. I did infiltrate Barcelona's government through my organization. I did plan to take control of this city. And I'm not the only one." Puig reaches into his briefcase and pulls out a thick folder. What you don't understand is that Operation Catalonia was just one part of a much larger plan. A plan that involves some of the most powerful people in Spain. People who are sitting in Madrid right now, watching this press conference, and wondering how much I'm going to reveal. So let me make this clear. If anything happens to me, if I have an accident, if I disappear, if I die of mysterious circumstances, everything I know about Operation España will be released to every major newspaper in Europe. Operation España. Nobody had heard that name before. But Puig's message was clear. Boixos Nois wasn't the end of the conspiracy. It was just the beginning. And whoever was really behind this had just been put on notice. The hunter had become the hunted. But who exactly was being hunted? And how far up did this conspiracy reach? Damage control mode. March 4, 1985. 8 a.m. Emergency meeting at La Moncloa Palace, Madrid. Spain's most powerful politicians gather in a room that officially doesn't exist. Prime Minister Felipe González sits at the head of the table. Around him, Interior Minister, Defense Minister, Director of National Intelligence. "Gentlemen," González begins, "we have a problem. According to our sources, Joaquin Puig has evidence that could bring down this government. Evidence of Operation España. Evidence that some of you were aware of what was happening in Barcelona and chose not to intervene." Interior Minister José Barrionuevo speaks first. "Prime Minister, I can assure you that my department had no knowledge of..." "José, please. We're all friends here. We all know that Puig couldn't have infiltrated Barcelona's government without cooperation from Madrid. The question is not whether we knew. The question is how we contain this." Defense Minister Narcís Serra clears his throat. "What are our options?" Option 1. We arrest Puig and claim he's a rogue criminal acting alone. We deny any government knowledge of his activities. Option 2. We acknowledge that there was a conspiracy, but claim we were investigating it and about to shut it down when the story broke. Option 3. Option 3. We eliminate the problem entirely. Prime Minister, Sarah says carefully, are we discussing what I think we're discussing? I'm discussing whatever needs to be discussed to protect the Spanish state. But before they could decide on their approach, an aide burst into the room. Sir, you need to see this. Immediately. On the screen, Joaquin Puig, speaking to reporters outside his Barcelona mansion. I want to make something very clear to my former associates in Madrid, Puig says, looking directly into the camera. I have documentation proving that Operation España was approved at the highest levels of Spanish government. I have recorded phone conversations. I have bank records. I have signed authorizations. And if anything happens to me, all of this evidence will be automatically released to newspapers in London, Paris, Rome, and New York. Not Spanish newspapers. International newspapers. The room fell silent. Their options had just been reduced to one. They had to let Joaquin Puig live. And they had to pray he would stay quiet. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. Puig had no intention of staying quiet. He was just getting started. March 10, 1985. 1 week after his first press conference, Joaquin Puig releases what he calls the Barcelona Files. 847 pages of documents, 312 photographs, 94 audio recordings. Evidence that Operation Catalonia was more successful than anyone imagined. Within 24 hours, Spanish newspapers are reporting connections between Boixos Nois and the construction of Barcelona's 1992 Olympic venues, illegal arms shipments through Barcelona's port, money laundering through Catalonian banks, political assassinations disguised as ultra-violence. But the most shocking revelation comes on page 394 of the files. A list of cities where similar operations were active. Valencia, Cava Nord-Valencianist Seville, Bairros Norte Bilbao, Harry Norte Madrid, Ultras Sur. Every major city in Spain had been infiltrated by what appeared to be football ultra groups. But according to Puig's documents, they were all part of the same network. All funded by the same sources. All following the same playbook. All ultimately controlled by the same people. When I saw those documents, recalls investigative journalist Carmen Soto, I understood that we weren't dealing with a Barcelona problem. We were dealing with a national conspiracy that had been operating for over a decade. The evidence showed coordination between ultra groups that should have been rivals. Shared intelligence. Joint operations. Coordinated violence designed to justify increased police presence. It was brilliant, Soto explains. Create chaos, then position your people as the solution to the chaos. Classic authoritarian playbook, but disguised as football fandom. But on March 15, 1985, something happened that nobody had planned for. Real Barcelona football fans, actual, legitimate supporters who had nothing to do with Boixos Nois, began to organize. They had learned that their club had been used as cover for a criminal conspiracy. They had discovered that the people claiming to represent their passion were actually undermining everything they loved about football. And they were angry. Very angry. The real ultras were about to go to war. Against the fake ultras. March 18, 1985. Barcelona versus Athletic Bilbao. The first El Clásico since the Boixos Nois scandal broke. But something was different as fans approached Camp Nou. There were two distinct groups of Barcelona supporters. On one side, Boixos Nois members, still loyal to their organization despite everything that had been revealed. On the other side, legitimate Barcelona fans who felt betrayed and wanted justice. What happened next shocked even seasoned riot police. The two groups of Barcelona supporters began fighting each other. Not Athletic Bilbao fans. Not Real Madrid supporters. Each other. I had never seen anything like it, recalls riot police commander Miguel Torres. Usually, fan violence is predictable. You know who's going to fight whom and why. But this, Barcelona fans were attacking Barcelona fans. It was complete chaos. But here's what made the situation terrifying. The Boixos Nois members weren't fighting like football fans. They were fighting like soldiers. They had formation, Torres explains. They had strategy. They had leaders giving orders through hand signals. This wasn't fan violence. This was military combat in a football stadium. By halftime, 73 people had been hospitalized. By the final whistle, parts of Camp Nou were destroyed. But the most disturbing part came after the match. When police reviewed security footage, they discovered something that changed everything. The Boixos Nois hadn't just been prepared for violence. They had been prepared for this specific violence, against these specific people, on this specific day. Surveillance showed them carrying weapons that were perfectly suited for close combat fighting in stadium seating. Communication equipment that allowed coordination across the entire stadium. Medical supplies suggesting they expected casualties. They knew this was going to happen, Torres realizes now. They had planned for a war against legitimate Barcelona fans. Which means they had been preparing to eliminate anyone who might oppose them. But that night, as police processed arrests and hospitals treated the wounded, Joaquin Puig disappeared. His mansion was empty. His offices were cleared out. His bank accounts were closed. And according to airport records, he had boarded a private jet to Buenos Aires 3 hours before the match began. Like he had known exactly what was going to happen. And exactly when he needed to leave. March 25, 1985. Interpol Headquarters, Lyon, France. Agent Sarah Mitchell receives a file that will change her understanding of organized crime forever. The Spanish government has officially requested international assistance in investigating what they're now calling the Ultra Network. But as Mitchell reviews the evidence, she realizes this case connects to investigations she's been tracking across 3 continents. We had been seeing similar patterns in Argentina, Italy, and Eastern Europe, Mitchell explains in a 2020 interview. Football ultragroups that were unusually well-funded, unusually well-organized, and unusually connected to political movements. The Buenos Aires connection wasn't random. Joaquin Puig hadn't fled to Argentina. He had returned to Argentina. Bank records showed that Puig had been receiving funding from Argentine sources since 1979. Specifically, from companies connected to former military officers from Argentina's dirty war. That's when we understood, Mitchell continues. This wasn't just about football or even about Spain. This was about exporting authoritarian control techniques that had been perfected during South America's military dictatorships. The playbook was brilliant in its simplicity. Identify passionate, working-class young men. Give them a sense of belonging and purpose. Train them in organized violence. Use them to infiltrate local government and business. Create chaos that justifies authoritarian responses. Position your network as the solution to the chaos you created. Within weeks, Interpol had identified similar networks in Lazio Ultras in Rome, connected to neo-fascist movements. Millwall Hooligans in London, connected to far-right political parties. As the investigation peeled back layer after layer, it became chillingly clear that the Ultra Network was not an accidental alliance but a deliberate, transnational instrument of power, its roots tangled between stadium terraces and the corridors of state violence. Exposed to the light, the network's carefully engineered chaos began to unravel, forcing authorities to rebuild battered communities and confront the ghosts that decades of secrecy had tried to bury.